So we've got Andy starting today for a few weeks to see if he. Yeah. So the theme which I introduced last week, I sort of did a little bit of a talk, a little bit of an introduction, showed you a few of my paintings last week. Hi, hello, hi Georgie. We've got a full house, haven't we? There's a couple of spots around. Yeah, a couple of chairs. Yeah, as I was saying, I don't know when we'll be back downstairs. This is nice up here, but it is a little bit tight for space. We should get pretty warm pretty quickly. Yeah, the theme I introduced last week is painting into the light, or what they call, the French call contre-jour. So it's that which means against the light. So it's looking into a light source. I brought last week. I mentioned that I got a few books and I'd forgotten them last week, so I managed to remember this week. This was a book I got last year when I won a load of book tokens for a painting competition. So, and I quite like this woman's work, and she paints in this sort of stuff. Hiya. She paints very much. A lot of her paintings are this kind of light effect, where you're sort of looking towards the light source, and it's a way of creating quite a nice atmosphere in your paintings. And a lot, if you're working with paintings that are trying to create a sort of atmospheric effect, lighting is very important. It's one way you can create a sense of atmosphere in your paintings. So there's a few examples here. So things like seascapes. So this sort of thing. I mean, yesterday was the sort of day where you could create these sort of images. So I went and did some sketching along the Thames yesterday, and there was quite a few instances where there's like sparkling light on the water, but they create a really nice sort of effect. There's quite a few others. There's a few bits about people there. Things like woodland scenes. These sort of where you're looking directly into a light source, the shadows are often very interesting. So you'll get kind of shadows radiating out. If you've got things like tall things like trees or people, not sort of if it's a mudflats, but if you've got things like these sort of subjects, you get these lovely sort of radiating shadows, which creates an interesting dramatic effect. So that's that one. See if there's anything else I'll show you. So, that was a townscape one. And again, it's the same sort of thing with the townscape. Radiating shadows. Quite often things are almost like silhouetted, so you don't get an awful lot of detail in say, this really reads more or less like a silhouette. You might get a little bit of variation within the figure, but quite often they're just simplified forms, perhaps lightened in where the light source is. She's using like a lighter tone for the figures than she is the ones on the edge, which is something that you could possibly play around with. So that's her work. Another artist that came to mind was when somebody was asking me about artists that use this sort of things. Do you come across Ken Howard? Yeah. Ken Howard's work. So he died a few years ago, but he was a very well-established Royal Academician, this country, and he's an artist that a lot of plein air artists really like and follow because he did a lot of outdoor work. So he's quite a hero of the plein air movement. So that would be an example, a bit like the other ones, but the light is probably more overhead here, so that you've got like little pools of shadow, but it's almost like an abstract. It's just like dots and dashes. Sometimes you'll get these little halos of light around people's heads and things like that. So that's an example. See, find a few other examples. So similar sort of thing here. Beach scenes, so there's some lovely sort of beach scenes where you've got this kind of contre-jour lighting, bit of sparkle on the water there, and I'm trying to find interiors. That's another interesting effect sometimes happens. If you've got like a transparent thing, like a windbreaker, you've got this sort of luminous quality. So that's something that is quite interesting. And then interiors, so figures against light sources. So something like this, where you've got, it creates quite a dramatic effect with shadowy figures, but almost like, again, slightly abstractly shaped. So I thought that might be quite an interesting thing to look at, project to look at. I've found I've taken a few photos recently things like that, that sort of thing. That's kind of like looking into the light source. That's a week or so ago. And this one there of trees. So if you want to do something like radiate trees with radiating shadows. But other than that, I've just kind of gone through my folders, and you could do, have a look through images you've got or that sort of thing. The one I thought I'd use as a demo. So this was a photo I took probably in January because it was a little bit frosty. Nice sort of early morning sunrise type light. And most sunrises or sunsets, if you're looking towards the sun, they are going to form this kind of contre-jour look. Things like the trees, they'll go completely almost sort of completely silhouetted. And also the colours, there's not really any green in these. These were like these sort of fir trees, so they would have been green pine, pine trees. But the colours are, in this, around here, they're more sort of warm colours around. I mean, it might be more of a photo effect, but it's got them more as warm colours. So that's the photo I took. I was thinking, well, that's quite nice, but that annoyed me a little bit. It was cutting it off. So I cropped it a little bit and went to that. And I thought, well, actually, the bit I'm really interested in is probably this bit. So again, I could crop it again and make it a little bit more, just focusing in. So that was the final one I ended up with. And again, I was wondering, do I need that much? I'm not really sure. You could possibly crop it a little bit either side. But that's quite an interesting thing. If you've got your own photos, photo references, work out which are the best bits you want. You don't have to draw and paint the whole image if it doesn't create a strong image. So sort of be prepared to make adjustments. So that's what I thought I'd use. So I'll do this. I might not get to the painting today. I might just sort of sketch it out. With this sort of subject, you could you could sketch it with a little bit of paint, but no, I just use the pencils for the time being. So I'm just using like a pastel pencil, and that way, whatever I pop down, this will wipe out quite easily, or I can just get a little bit of water and make this a bit moister. So I'm thinking to tackle this in oils eventually. So this will be like oils. I haven't done any oils for a couple of weeks in class. So really all I would need really is just perhaps the main tree trunk and an indication of where these two trunks are, and then a rough shape around the canopy of leaves. Something like that. And that's kind of coming out. I won't go too, should do that. And then the main trunk is coming through to here. And then an indication where the figure is. I quite liked having the figure in there, but again, you wouldn't have to if you didn't want to include a figure. You could leave that out. So he's going to be more or less there. And then we've got the pavements going up to there. The horizon is probably about here. It's easier to get maybe the main features like the tree in first, then work out where the horizon is in relation to the tree. And if I've got my spacing right, there's a road cutting through there, which is about there in relation to the tree. That will come through there, and then this path would carry on there, and then the steps, which I quite liked. I quite like that sense of sort of going down the steps. The railings I'm not going to worry too much about at this point. I probably would just paint those in once I've got some of this background colour. So that would be a nice place to start really. The other thing about this one, I've chosen to work on white, and I normally paint on a coloured background with oils, but with these sort of colours, these kind of sunset colours, I find it quite hard to achieve those sometimes, particularly sort of orangey colours. So I find sometimes having white and just keeping the colour a little bit transparent, a bit like a watercolour, that can help. So that's the reason I've gone for that. So is that okay? That's that far. Yep. Yeah. So if you do want any images, we've got different images here. As I say, these ones here that are out, the ones I've sorted out, but there may well be images in the other folders if you wanted to use those. And if you want to do something completely different, that's absolutely fine as well. You don't have to follow this particular theme, or you can pick it up in a couple of weeks' time when you're ready. Okay.